And again, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining another month of volunteer and GA pilot safety considerations. It's a lot of fun doing these. Really appreciate you guys coming. We'll hang for a couple of seconds while we wait for people to get on. It's only 7:01. And again, it's great to see the response that we've been getting to doing the webinars. A lot of fun for us. I appreciate having Rob and this time Carly with us. So we'll give it a couple of minutes and then we'll dive in. So we'll see if it's slowed down here joining. The good news is we should have no technology challenges like last times. It's good. Cool.
Yeah, it looks like we're up to over 160 now, Mark.
Okay, so I'm going to skip the first slide because that was what everyone's been seeing every month. We'll go into introducing who's on the phone today, or on the Zoom. It's me, FAAST team rep, and very active in Air Care Alliance, which is like a trade association for volunteer pilot groups all over the US. We have Rob, who just recently retired from the FAA and graciously has, helped us start this and co-host this and work on this. So thank you, Rob. And Rob will be managing the Q&A today. So if you do have any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A. The comment feature will not work. Brian Schiff couldn't join us, but he'll try to keep getting on when he can. He's a busy AA captain. Jim Logie is our co-host and starts our webinars for us. And Carly, one of the co-founders of STEM Flights, who you may have noticed from last month talking about their organization, is going to help manage Q&A today as well. So thanks so much, Carly, for taking the time to do this.
Before you advance, I'd like to just say something. Have a question already in the Q&A where all
Sure.
questions should be posted. Vladimir asked about Wings credit, and Wings credit is automatically granted within 2 or 3 days for
Yes.
anybody who's attended 50 minutes or more.
Right.
Back to you, Mark.
Thank you for asking that. And I'll add that to the first screen too. That should be obvious. So good. Again, thanks everyone for joining. So we'll start diving in here. We're up to 7:02 and over 200 already. That's good. So and some of these repeat. Let's stop and do the poll. Can we do that real quick?
Yeah, let me get that launched.
And I'm going to apologize for those who've answered in the past, but we're trying to track this, and this helps the people who approve us doing these webinars feel like we're getting good reach out there. So, are you already a volunteer pilot? Are you active in Wings? And letting us know if you want someone to follow up or provide information on the Wings program. So, did you go ahead and launch that?
It is launched. It's running. We've got about, in some categories, 80% responding. Some others, it's looking good.
Very good. Well, thanks.
Interesting. Yeah. Hey, Mark, it looks like 88% are active in Wings. That's
Oh,
pretty impressive.
that's a very big change, and that's why we like to run these. So
Yes,
thanks to
yes.
those guys who are active in Wings. Um, and we're going to add a question next month that will be, are you new to the webinar? And that will help us evaluate whether the marketing is working. So
Okay,
cool.
I'm going to end the poll and we'll
Great.
get to see the stats for everybody. I'm going to share the results. There we go.
So volunteering seems to be the same as every time. So very good, but a big bump in Wings. Thanks so much, guys.
Yes,
Let's
yes.
move on.
Love to see that. Love to see your active participation in and your proficiency, keeping your proficiency in that Wings program is
Right.
an excellent program to keep you at the top of your game
And
and to monitor it. Go ahead, Mark.
yeah, we review this slide every month, and everyone can make an impact regardless of what kind of plane you have, whether you rent it, borrow it, any way that you have it, and even people that can do non-flying roles, or even if you can do non-flying roles, either as outreach and or greeters or drivers, anyone can help, and we can make a big impact. Here's the wing program stuff. I always have this here, but we won't spend any time on it. But you can do QR scans if you want. or just go to FAASafety.org. So success today, like we do every time, is we want to make sure people are aware of the opportunity that is rewarding, but it's also a big responsibility. And we're here just to share experiences. We're not here to instruct. And welcome any comments. And we also welcome you giving us feedback on scenarios and some of the things that you'll see today. Other people other than me are beginning to contribute. Also want to do every time sort of share numbers on why this is a compelling opportunity for us or excuse for us to go fly. The numbers at the bottom left are things we've shared in the past. I won't repeat going over those. We'll share some new numbers. According to the National Organization of Rare Disorders, 30 million Americans have a rare disorder. And anytime you hear the word rare, it means that probably your medical care is not around the corner. So you probably are traveling way more than 100 miles to find someone that can help you with your rare disease. And it doesn't mean typically one trip. It usually means many trips. The other interesting statistic is that there are 360 hospitals in short-term jeopardy or medical treatment facilities of being closed, and there's 700 overall that are likely to be closed. What's really odd about this is the state of Texas has the highest number of short-term at-risk hospitals. But again, the more rural hospitals that close, the more need there is for transportation over 100 miles to get to care. And good representation of the people that we fly or animals or cargo. It's all over the place and again, fits in any kind of airplane. So we go over this every time, but I'll be very fast again. Many different kinds of organizations. Human trafficking recently is getting a lot of attention. We just had a national conference of these type of organizations and heard some of the compelling stories behind the value of using private planes for relocating people that are victims of human trafficking. Keep on going here, and I'll try to special or present two different organizations every month. I get a lot of questions about flying turtles. The process is now happening all over the US, but one of the bigger missions is from the Northeast to the South every year when turtles get caught not swimming south of the Gulf Stream. So NOAA is a very big supporter, as is local aquariums like the Boston Aquarium. They go around, have volunteers going on the beaches, picking up turtles that are cold stunned, stabilizing them. We put them in private planes. We fly them to different locations all over the South. And there's actually a place called the Turtle Hospital in Marathon in the Keys. And they have an operating room, exam room, x-rays, MRIs. It's kind of impressive to see the level of treatment that turtles are getting, but great mission. And then we have, I think you all know this, but there's discrete angel flight organizations all over the US. They're regional. Each one is standalone. Angel Flight Central is a great example of one of those organizations. They've been around almost 30 years and have flown over 36,000 flights.
Not only people who are willing to put their trust in us as an organization to allow us to assist them in reaching the hope and the wellness that they're desiring, but to come alongside the men and women who fly these aircraft, donate $2.5 million a year in donations and aircraft expenses for us to go and pick up strangers that they've never even met before.
So again, great organization impacting families over the central US, which is also where, again, a lot of the rural designated areas are. So keep them in mind if you're flying that area. Great team. So as you know, we have all these safety considerations that we could spend a lifetime reviewing at an individual level. This week or this month, we'll hit most of these. The center red ones will always be hitting. And this, again, is a great list if you ever want to just do something on your own and drill down. So I think you remember this picture from last month where there was a video of me being landing at an airport near Boston, and I wasn't expecting it. But I think one of the things that I meant to really be calling out is that we should be continuously striving for mastery. That's something that we really probably will never attain, but it's just something that we should get etched in our mind. I would think that we want to be as good as we possibly can, given the compelling nature of the types of things that we're doing. I won't spend too much time on this, but for people that are new to volunteering, the process is pretty straightforward. Someone has to request a mission, and awareness of the availability of these services is one of the biggest challenges that we all face. People just don't know to ask. So the one thing that you can do on the ground or when you're not flying is just make people aware of the breadth and types of services that are available for no cost to them. A lot of people just can't even accept the fact that these things are available. The other is, passenger safety discipline. There's courses at AOPA on volunteer flying. It really stresses personal minimums and having a discipline to really stick to the minimums that you set up. And this example you see every month, but perhaps doing something that introduces people to using your airplane before they ever get to the airport. As many things as you can do without it being in an airport situation where it could be rushed or disrupt your flow before you go flying is good to do. The volunteer pilot organizations have their own intake processes and policies for what to review when. It's really up to us as pilots to come up with what we think is a comprehensive set of tasks and activities to do before people get to the airport, and then what happens at the airport and then after the mission. So this is just an example. There's many other examples, and if anyone ever has questions about their particular approach to this, happy to entertain receiving any questions or emails, excuse me. So we can dive into a scenario, and this is one that we reviewed last month, and I thought it important to come back to it. One of the reasons that it was important is I did get a bunch of questions, but also Rob had asked a good question here. And in this particular case, had a number of failures that were avionics related that had not ever been seen by me in training or by any fellow members or owners of this particular type of aircraft. And it was startling. It had to really get ahead of the plane eventually, stabilize, and go to the VMC airport. One of the questions asked is, how do you deal with something when it's come back from service? Because this particular issue was caused by a bug in the avionics that had just been updated. So what I'm adding here is, what you do to prevent or try to get ahead of not being the first person or the test pilot when something's been touched in your airplane. In this case, I flew the plane directly to the factory because it was such a startling event. The factory couldn't find anything wrong, and no one had seen this event. Everything checked out at the factory. I picked up the plane on a VMC day just to be not getting caught in the same situation of dealing with these problems in an IMC day. And I got home and I said, this makes no sense. I can't be the only person that this has ever happened to. So on a reasonably VMC day, the ceilings are around 3,000 feet. I flew approaches by myself with a video camera running until I could replicate the problem. And I was finally able to replicate the problem. In this case, cause was if you got vectored too close to the final approach fix, the avionics wouldn't couple correctly. It would couple laterally, but not vertically, and it would get stuck on the final approach fix and would not advance to the next fix. So it was getting confused, pointing to a waypoint that was then behind you once you flew past the final approach fix. So I was able to share how I was able to replicate this with the flight school. that I had trained at and a mentor, shared it on the owners forum. And then I went out again and I flew until I could figure out a recovery process of what buttons to push and what sequence to get everything to work predictably. Now, that was kind of an extreme example because most avionics these days do have good enough quality control not to be putting you in that situation. But if it does, you that striving for mastery is an important thing to do. One thing I would change is I wouldn't be doing that solo like I had done this. I would have probably grabbed, a co-pilot in the future if I was ever going out to do this. But at least it was VMC, but the times I was doing this. Then I had another situation where I had gone for service in Florida and I'm based in Boston and had a very rapid transient failure message that was so rapid it could not tell what it was. It was just red. And I think most of us know that if there's a red advisory message that it's something that you should attend to. But if we fly planes, we also see erroneous messages on a somewhat regular basis because they self-resolve and never come back. So this one required me to land to get fuel on the way back. Had another weird message on the ground. Again, transient went away, engines were running, all the parameters were in range. Finally sat down with a video camera, took a video of it happening, got it to happen predictably. It's a message no one had seen before, or actually a combination of messages. And just before they sent a team to come look at the airplane and tear it down, we had someone local remove a panel and said, should this cable be dangling like this? And it turned out that one of the two FADEC cables had never been put back on the engine after service. And apparently the FADEC worked because the backup was driving the engine properly. But again, not letting it just sit and be happy with the fact that it was a transient message and the engines were working properly. So what I developed and what I really suggested for other people is, and again, I'm not an instructor, it's just me as an owner saying every time I have a repair, I've got to start coming up with my own checklist. I look for other people's checklists for return to service. And I also try to think if there are any possible flight scenarios that I can use that will help me not get surprised or startled down the road, particularly in any scenario, not just right after service. Uh, I did a pickup of the airplane after both engines had hot sections. Turbines have a hot section inspection. One of the engine had some corrosion and had a major rework. And I tried to schedule picking up the plane in a VMC day, which did not end up happening. So one of my flight scenarios was to do high-speed runs down the runway, even though that was not in the factory list for return to service. I just said, it's the only thing I can think of as a way to test whether the engine's spooling up well and going to run well. So try, just again, recommendation that you come up with personal checklists after a service that you can use and to talk to others about what they're using to really go beyond what the factory or the service center may consider as a reasonable return to service checklist. I'm not sure if there's any questions on this one. No, Rob, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Yeah, there's no questions at this point. One question was posed about the slide deck. Is that being made available in like a PDF form for anybody that
It's
would like
not
it?
being made available as a PDF. We are posting the webinars.
Yes.
And if someone needs the slide deck for one of their groups or wants to work on something for a particular group, just let me know and we can see what we can do to accommodate.
And those videos are going to be posted where on Social Flight as well as Air Care
Air
Alliance?
Care Alliance in the pilot information section of Air Care Alliance, but Social Flight, well, they'll be posted on Social Flight as well, and that should be a Wings credit version. The ones that are posted on Air Care Alliance under the pilot safety section are just the webinars themselves. And eventually the Air Care Alliance YouTube channel will have them as So dive into another fun one, tires. I'm not sure how many people pay attention to their tires, but this is a really unusual one that was kind of a shock when it first happened. And nose shimmy, a lot of pilots have experienced some kind of nose shimmy. In this particular airplane, there was a problem happening in the fleet as the fleet was aging, that the nose wheel would start violently, I mean, and extremely violently shaking the plane right after touchdown. Things would fall out, the oxygen mask would come off, the stratus would fly off the glare screen. Very disconcerting. But the plane was still controllable, and if you braked harder, it made it worse. So you had to make an on-the-spot decision whether to continue landing or go around. So what was quite odd is that as soon as you slowed down to taxi speed, the shimmy would go away. In this particular case, when it first happened, tire pressure was okay. And the question was, fly home, keep flying this plane. Did it exist anywhere else as an issue? And in this case, uh, called the mechanic. Mechanic had not seen it before or heard of it. Tire pressure was good and decided to fly home, and there was no shimmy. And again, there was no shimmy for a while. However, the tire on this particular plane at the time, which was a leased airplane, had no treads. And it had no treads from the beginning of me flying it. So the tire was already nearing end of life, and the owner had not been doing anything about it. So who knows how asymmetrical the tire really was at that point, but the shimmy would come back only at certain airports and certain conditions. So it also began to come up more in the entire fleet. So a lot of research went into trying to understand whether it was rigging, but the most common fix was to change your tire. Other fixes were tire pressure oriented. So at that point, became very disciplined about setting up routines for testing the tires in terms of tire pressure. I know in the Cirruses that I fly, checking the tire pressure is a royal pain. And a lot of peer pilots, when I started mentioning, that the discipline that I've developed to try to, every other week or every week, check tire pressure, a lot of them were mentioning that they maybe check their tire pressure once or twice a year, which was just also unfathomable. And the other was discussing what was tolerable wear and tear on the mains or the nose wheel, and what the FAA considered to be reasonable wear and tear versus time to replace indicators. So the pictures on the left show rather obvious things, wear points down to the cords, and then wear marks where you have no more tread. But on the middle one left, you'll see that there are cracks in the tires, and that's not necessarily a bad tire. A lot of tires can have cracks, and as long as they're not down to the wear indicator, and that's why I have that picture on the bottom right, near the bottom right, is unless it's showing cords, technically the tire is still usable. So strongly recommend looking up the FAA circular on tire wear and care and trying to think of establishing a personal discipline that's specific to your kind of airplane, so we don't scare ourselves and get stuck in a very severe shimmy situation, um, and avoid having a flat tire on a runway. And I've had a flat tire on a runway and veered off, luckily staying on the runway. So in that case, there was a worn tire that finally just couldn't deal with it anymore, in a rented airplane. So thought it was worth sharing this and hoping that everyone comes up with a good plan at looking at their tires. And you may have caught, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark, there's one comment made by Joe. The Civil Air Patrol requires a tire pressure check on the first flight of every day. I think that's a great
Yeah,
practice.
that's great. Yeah. I think a lot of people that have uh, planes with wheel pants and access doors get a little put off by doing it. One of the tricks that we came up with the Cirrus is to put a paint mark on the wheel where the stem is, so we can make sure that the stem is lined up with the access door. Other people have other tricks, but it's something that I know that when I did start talking to my peers, it was surprising how little attention tires were getting. So you may have also begun to figure out that I'm stressing a lot of things about the physical airplanes this trip or this session. So this particular case is one that's happened to me as well as others, and that I was discussing it with in the fuel cap. Um, it's kind of interesting. The fuel cap has, depending on the type of airplane, has different performance requirements. Some, if not, are part of the venting system. Other ones are just simply, clamp on and off. This A36 example was someone not paying attention to the fact that their fuel cap was failing, and it was just getting harder and harder and harder to close to a lock position. And in this case, they luckily, it didn't fall off, but they did notice after landing that it wasn't locked. And then in the Eclipse, you have a nice clear forward facing indicator, but it doesn't mean that you can't put it on totally in reverse or off to the side. So there's no mechanism that prevents a fueler from not putting it on correctly. And in this particular case, I did land once and the entire cap was was no longer mounted and was dangling by a tether. No idea what mode of flight that happened, but it was extremely disconcerting. And the usual drill on any plane that I've flown checklist wise is if the fuel is to always check the clasp on the fuel cap to make sure that it's closed before I leave the ground. So after I found that one dangling, it became an even stronger reminder. And sometimes I check twice to make sure that the fuel cap is clamped down. The diamond that I trained in, more than once, the cap was totally missing after a flight, and not only with me, but with other students. And I believe they may have improved that clasp over time, but it was a very loose clasp. So discussion, oops, wrong one. So checklist discipline and understanding the impact of not having a cap on your flight. And then consider updating your personal checklist to make sure that you're checking this, more than once. It's if necessary. One of the other issues, and I'm not sure if anyone flies at airports that are towered or busy class C's or Deltas, is that FAAD is taken extremely seriously. So if you have a loose cap that falls off, you need to also notify that, the airport that you're missing a piece of the plane, and they should go inspect the taxiways and even the runway to make sure it's not sitting there, something that someone can hit or ingest in their engine. So no questions on that one, so I'll move on. This is an interesting one as well. Flap failure that did not result in an advisory message or alert of any type. The plane had the flaps start to come out. You set them to take off before you start your taxi to go out to take off. And in this case, they came out asymmetrically and got stuck. And they would not go up, they would not go down, they just would not move at all. The POH had no rule for this particular situation because it wasn't enunciated as a failure. So a lot of planes that have electrically powered segments have miraculous recovery when you turn them on and off. And the Eclipse is one of those planes where things seem to self-resolve once you power cycle them. In this particular case, it didn't do anything. And for a moment, considered whether the plane could be flown without flaps because the departure airport had a long runway and the arrival airport had a very long runway. But eventually just said, hey, this is an anomaly. Called the volunteer pilot organization, said no go, and they were able to find someone to do the flight rather quickly. And this was a really rural area. So one of the mentors that I've had over the years uses the word has a call out for the word should. So if you ever use the word should in your evaluation of a scenario, then that just means no. So to etch in your process that, oh, that should be okay. Well, no, I just used the word should. I'm not going to do it. In this particular case, the word should lingered longer than it could have, or could have. It probably added 20, 30 minutes to the evaluation process. And I did end up checking the owner forum to see that the others were having a similar issue. And in fact, they just stayed on the ground. So the good news was that what I did well is I did decide not to go and not to push it, to have to try to find a way to get home. And I was lucky enough to get someone to come and get me. So it works out, and you do find in the volunteer community that people come and help and on very short notice, both pilots and passengers. And in this case, I called someone who answered their phone in Italy on vacation, who then called someone else who then was there to pick me up in a little over an hour. So again, the community is very strong and very supportive. And it's hard to describe how good that is for a pilot, to know that you've got this many people helping you. And just out of fun context, I did go through getting a ferry flight permit, and the context is we went to pick up the plane, tried the flaps, everything worked, and it never ever failed again with no explanation. So one of those things about planes, you never quite know the scenarios. Factory couldn't explain it, but was on the alert and knew what to do if it were to happen again.
Hey, Mark, got a little comment or a question regarding the tire care.
Sure.
There's an AC 20-97B. Charles shared this with us, and it's found on the Dynamic Regulatory System, or DRS. You just Google AC 20-97B, and it'll take you to the DRS system, and you'll be able to dig a little bit deeper into it. That's right, listed right there. There you go.
It's very good. It's very good.
Thanks, Charles.
Cool. So we'll leave the flap one, which is a fun one. So here's a one that perhaps is not gone over enough for everyone that's renting planes or borrowing airplanes, and that's to really understand the plane that you're renting. So in this case, pretty straightforward. Pilot trying to do their first long trip, or this is actually me, trying to do first long trip on IMC day, could not get a co-pilot, could not get an instructor, could not find anyone for any amount of money to fly with me because it was the day before Christmas. So, and took off in IMC, felt comfortable in the airplane, and get to a point in the trip where the rain is getting heavy. I ask for a deviation around the heavy rain, and air traffic control just says, you can do it. Don't worry. You'll be out of it in 10 or 15 minutes. So being a relatively young pilot, I, of course, took what ATC was telling me as gospel and that it would be safe. In the middle of the heavy rain, have a not very turbulent, but very loud enough in a DA-42 to be making a lot of noise. Have an engine fire warning go off. And the checklist is extremely short. Turn off the engine, turn off the autopilot. Hand fly, and you're on your own. So to declare emergency, ATC asked me souls and fuel on board and intentions. During all of my training, no one had gone over the fact that those would be the questions that they would be asking. So that was a little off-putting. Uh, I uh, I requested Atlantic City. That seemed to be the closest, and I had flown there during training, so it made a lot of sense to make that request. But they came back to me and said, "Oh, we have to turn you away from the airport because there's other traffic." So that seemed odd to me, but again, being relatively light on hours, I said, "Sure," and turned away from the airport and started having, bigger and bigger stress because I would look out at the engine and I could not see anything that was on fire. But I had never gone through that in training to say what are the indicators that a fire was actually happening or not happening. Uh, so I'm not sure how many people have had extreme stress environments, and this is a big part of human factors, is as you get yourself more worked up in the stress, you can get tunnel vision, which means that your scan of the instruments gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So you may not be checking them at all, or you may not be checking them in the right sequence anymore, or you may be checking them and then not assimilating the data that you're being given. So in this case, I was in one of those phases of the stress, which was taking a long time to get to the airport, hand flying and in the rain. And this particular radar image is from FlightAware. It's not particularly accurate, but it shows the path. And ATC says, "Oh, we want you to go around." And one of the things, if you do a lot of twin training, is you understand that most of the accidents happen during go rounds. And it can get inherently unstable because you may lose rudder control. So I said, no. So I'm going to land. You can give me vectors, or I'm going to land wherever I can see out the window, but I'm going to land. They gave me a vector, which worked out. I landed, and I had fire trucks, everyone waiting for me there, and guy, jump out of the airplane in the heavy rain, and watch the fire guys look at the plane and said, "Yeah, no, there's no fire, no big deal. This happens all the time." So I was like, okay. So um, was kind of relieved and not relieved. I'm not sure anyone's had an adrenaline rush before and then the crash that happens afterwards, but there is a physiological crash that kind of happens after you've been in a high stress situation. So went through that. And also in my training to that point, no one had said, "Oh, let's practice taxing on one engine." And because of the adverse yaw that happens with only having one engine, it makes it almost impossible to easily taxi. So it took almost an hour to taxi back to the FBO. So anyway, so one of the things that we learned, that I learned in particular, is I had to understand the what the service bulletins included, and I needed to understand more about what happens in an emergency situation process end to end, and how the heck to figure out whether I was getting sucked into a stress impact that was impacting my ability to fly the plane well. I did land, and I did say unable at a very critical point, which was in my favor. But the rest, I definitely could have done better, and probably could have done better with a different approach to training, which probably is addressed now. And this occurred 14 years ago. So things I think have come away since then in training. But the service bulletin that applied to this particular plane, and it took a couple of months for the flight school to give me this information, was that there was a service bulletin that said that you'd get false positives for a fire in heavy rain. And they had not done that service bulletin, and it had come out almost 2 months earlier. So the instructor that I flew with had no idea about the service bulletin, and I had no idea about the service bulletin. So I was off on my own as a young pilot, flying with something that I could have just ignored because I would have known that it was a false pilot positive. So important, The recommendation here is it's always important to know everything about your plane before you leave the ground, especially if it's a rented plane in a shared community. Anyone in this, Rob?
All set.
Another thing about our planes and understanding, and this is from one of our viewers, which has also happened to me. Go to pick up someone after flying 400 miles to go get them, and realize, and this is the first time this particular person is flying, and this is not their picture, by the way. And it's a compassion flight, so they're going to visit a grandchild who'd had severe burns. And it turns out the seatbelt's too small. And the pilot had no seatbelt extender, had never needed one in the past. And the plan B to get them there wasn't one. And they had been dropped off, so the person who had driven them to the airport had not stuck around. So this was quickly getting into one of those get their itis type situation. And the pilot asked permission to try to make it fit, which meant reaching in a way that may seem inappropriate because it was going to require trying to pull the seatbelt down over the person. So the passenger in this case said, go ahead, and he was able to pull it tight enough to get it to connect and complete the flight. And also realized afterwards that the person may have had a hard time reaching over to unbuckle the seatbelt. So there may have been an egress issue. And also the person looked significantly over the weight that had been listed on the flight plan or the itinerary for the mission. So these are, again, all issues that say, should I be doing this flight? So one of the things that changed over the years, but it depends on the technology of the volunteer organization, is that the height of the passenger has been added so that you can quickly estimate whether this person's going to have a girth issue to get into your seatbelt, and something that you can assess before you even sign up for the mission. The other organizations, if they're not collecting it, there's nothing wrong with you asking for that information when you do your pre-flight call to the passengers, just saying, oh, by the way, could you tell me your height? That can be a big help. One of the other things that I've used sometimes is to put the crossing seatbelt behind the person just to keep it from being one of the limiting factors. Not necessarily recommended, and really is something you need to check to make sure it's not one of the limitations in your airplane. But it can happen that can make for an awkward situation to try to get someone connected to the seatbelt, and then become a safety issue if they don't have enough mobility to get themselves disconnected in an emergency. So something to consider. In the plane I fly, there isn't even a seatbelt extender option. So they're either going to fit or they're not going to fit. So up to you guys to decide whether you would want to even carry a seatbelt extension, but a lot of times also the seats themselves have a weight limitation. And our plane, it's 300 pounds, and I've had a 350 plus pound person show up to fly once that caused a issue. So if there's no questions, we'll move on from here.
Hey, Mark,
We did have a question that I thought was interesting. Leo is asking, what do you do for your passengers or patients in these situations? For example, you might get stuck away from the point that the passenger needs to be. How do you handle that?
So a good question. I actually, here, why don't I jump to one? I'll jump to this one. So we'll use that as a segue into this one. So here's a child returning home from cancer treatments, checked out after a multi-month stay in Boston Children's. And the thunderstorm line is much worse than was forecast. It's 200 miles solid on the East Coast. And the usual routing would take me right through the middle of it. So it was not clearing. Family was already on the way to the airport. Um, and, had to decide whether, they should not be coming. And what was not disclosed was that they needed medical equipment support um, for the both travel and just in general needed to be on two different kinds of machines. So, I got motivated when they got to the airport. I was still trying to figure out what to do, um, and said, okay, this is an example of, do I send them back to Boston because they need, treatment or the support of medical staff? Do I pay for a hotel room and can they survive in a hotel room? Or do I bring them home with me and stay overnight? Or, what should I do? So I tried one more thing. Whoops. So one thing I could have done better is assume that there would be one of those days where I wouldn't get through this thunderstorm line. Those are never perfect, things to do. But I could have also probably asked more questions about this particular patient because I had not seen them before. And the intake process is never perfect, so it's always good to ask again if there's any machinery that they're dependent on to fly. I did well not to get caught up in mission bias. I used a mentor to say, hey, what do you think about possible routes? Who confirmed that going through the thunderstorm line was not a good idea. And so I did think of one more thing, and that was to ask the briefer if I could perhaps fly 100 miles south into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and then make a right-hand turn around the end of the line of thunderstorms back towards the US. And this was not on any route anywhere. I was just going straight into the ocean for 100 miles and hanging a right-hand turn. But I thought, well, it doesn't hurt to ask. It was going to turn it into a max range flight. And I did happen to have life jackets and a raft in the plane. So it was viable too. And they really wanted to get home after that many months of children's. So the briefer in this particular case said, give me, I'll call you back. And he had negotiated what I had discussed, which was heading into the middle of the ocean. And that was it. No waypoints, no nothing, just head into the ocean. So very supportive, in the clearance, trying to figure out something that would work. And I had never thought to ask a briefer to help with that in the past. So that ended up working out really well, really well. And as soon as I got launched, Boston cleared me literally on the heading and said I could turn right whenever I wanted. So again, that can be a good thing from routing support point of view. The briefers are very eager to help when they know what you're doing. And then going back to the example of what to do if you're going to get stranded. So most of the organizations will provide money if you're picking someone up or you have to land to avoid weather. Most of the organizations will cover hotel and food. I've only done that once. And what I did also is we were close enough to the destination that I rented them a car and let them drive the rest of the way. And I stayed overnight until the weather passed. So there's, again, there's never a good excuse to fly through the weather, or if you have a mechanical, just hang out, something will work out. The volunteer pilot organizations are very, very supportive typically, and you're far from the first to encounter this. At this point, Angel Flight Central that we just saw earlier has been around 29 years. A lot of the organizations have been around at least a decade. They have the drill down and they will help you. So you're not alone. You can use them as a support organization or even concierge service. I've called and had even my admin. I've got another example on here as well as to what you can do to support yourself or someone else in a certain scenario. But this is one where I wanted to go out of the way to uh, not have to be the person to figure out how to support someone with this particular set of medical needs. So over answering the question, but thanks for asking. It's a good one to know about. Um, we can jump to, we were there. Here, I'm going to jump ahead. I'm really screwing up the order. So this is also going to relate to your question. So this is flying turtles. Um, and sometimes for weather, sometimes for reasons none of us really understand, when we call and ask for our clearance, we get what we think we're going to get, and then just before we take off, they say, "Oops, we don't really mean that. Here's your new clearance." And you could be in a run-up area, it could be taxiing, you could be anywhere that's inconvenient. In this particular case, this was a TBM guy who was based where the star is on this little map in New Jersey, and flying to Florida with a fuel stop planned in, I think it's Myrtle or somewhere in South Carolina. So person had done, extra fuel on board, everything was set, got the reroute from ATC, accepted it quickly without necessarily thinking about the impact, and took off. However, soon realized that this was way out of the way, lots of headwinds, probably going to be a really tight fuel situation. And when flying the turtles, they want you to keep them between, like right around 70 degrees. They want you to minimize your flight time. So you have some passenger pressure, in the back of your head. And you, have a support team waiting to take the turtles quickly out of the plane and move them to their new place, or you need to do a quick fuel stop and then keep on going. So it got really obvious really quickly. They would have to make a fuel stop unless someone started giving shortcuts. And in this case, there was no shortcuts coming. So what happened here? Whoops, wrong one again. So the pilot, and this is not me, the pilot sent this in, said, probably should have done a reroute impact assessment before leaving the ground, but had made this flight so many times, assumed that the reroute was not going to be that bad and that it really wouldn't be impacting, or that they would give him shortcuts along the way. And because he didn't take that time, he didn't really have a fuel stop plan, nor did anybody on the ground. So he could have done a little bit better pre-flight, awareness building with the team that was going to be meeting him. And then, how do you get information while you're, in flight? They had not been trained on how to use flight aware or flight radar to track flights. So the good news is he delivered all the turtles. None of them passed away. They were probably a little tired of living in the banana boxes, but and one of the things that a lot of times when people are looking at these things, if you look at a turbine and you say, "Oh, I'll just fly lower and maybe that will get me another reroute." When you start flying lower in anything with a turbine, you're burning 1.5 to 2 times the fuel, and sometimes even worse than that. So that phenomenally impacts your range, and you end up having to do a fuel stop when you don't want to do one. So in this particular case, because he was running so late, he ended up having to make a decision whether to stay overnight or, after a very, very long day, just turn around and go back home. And he correctly, and I didn't have room to type all that in, decided to stay out and stay over. And the organization at the end where the turtles were offered to pay for his accommodations, but in this case, he just did it on his own. So again, organizations are very, very supportive and appreciative of any of us doing work either on the ground or in the air. And even on unplanned days like this, it all seems to work out. In this case, this was a couple of years ago, this particular pilot now has an in-reach texting solution. And I'm not sure if anyone's used the new iPhone satellite feature yet, but it does work. I used it on Monday. So if you are flying and you point your iPhone to the sky, it will uh, sync up with, depending on what version of iPhone, and I don't remember the minimum number of the iPhone that you need to have. It will tell you to turn right or turn left to have the iPhone sync up. And then you can start sending text messages from the air for no charge, at least for now. So very, very interesting, but no reason not to be in touch anymore. And flight aware and flight radar helps them track. So let's go back to another one from, and we're almost out of time, but I'm going to go back to this one because this one is from Monday. I'm sorry about the sideways facing graphic here, but I couldn't figure out how to squeeze it down and still have it readable. But an instructor and I, late passenger, first time flight, coming back or going back home, did pre-flight, and we're both, in my case, I'd been to this airport many, many, many times in both Cirrus and the Eclipse. So I was kind of in shock when I saw this particular message, which said, all runways closed by NOTAM for certain operations. So very, very, very weird. And that was until 4:30 in the afternoon. And there didn't seem to be any reasonable alternatives because the family's only car was at that airport. So I finally decided, let's call the FBO, say, are they open? This is really odd for you guys. And they said, oh yeah, we're getting planes all the time. So that made no sense as well. And en route confirmed with air traffic control that the weather was open, but there was no weather being broadcast, and the nearest report was quite a ways away, and was favoring one of the bigger, the usual active runway, which was almost 7,000 feet. And this airport's near the ocean. So we're landing, and I do my usual out the window check, and the windsock is pointing in the opposite direction. So you're getting close enough to land to receive the windsock. And they say, okay, I should know better because I've flown into this airport and it's near the water. And in the afternoon, you're going to have sea breeze, which is going to be in the opposite direction of the inland airport that was reporting favorable for this particular runway. So, so things that definitely could do better on is look at the detail of the NOTAMs. And this is the detail coming off my iPhone, which is where I usually read these things. And on the first page was that the RCO wasn't working, but it had this red closed on the runway. But if you notice this little thing that said NW 500 feet, no idea what that meant. Never, ever had seen that before. So it turns out that it was only the northwest 500 feet of the total runway that was closed. And on the next page, you would have to page down to find this. That would tell you that the weather wasn't working. So remember to read the detail. And if you don't, if you see something that you don't recognize, find someone to ask what it means. In this case, I eventually figured it out. And again, I had missed that the weather was not working, and I had not remembered about it's been winters, so the sea breeze hasn't been there, and it's back. So little things to look for that are different and we don't get to see every day in ForeFlight. We're about at the end of the hour. I'm just going to check to see if there's any questions.
Just one thing about the seatbelt. So Sean commented about 91.107 and shoulder harnesses, and they says basically if they're installed, they should be used.
Yeah.
Jay, can you comment a little bit more on that, Mark?
Yeah, that one, again, I think it's also down to your plane's limitations. So if they're there, they should be used. If your people can't get them on physically, do you scrub the flight or do you not scrub the flight? And that's where I reference the limitations in the airplane.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know that seatbelts are a TSO'd item. They're certified. They've got a stamp, a TSO stamp on them. So I'm not even sure how the extenders work.
Yeah, exactly. They're supposed to be TSO'd as well.
Yes.
So Generally, not a big fan of extenders. They're sort of defeating what the overall purpose of that shoulder belt is as well.
Mhm.
But see, so again, I think worth researching on your own to figure out what's right for your particular airplane. Again, appreciate you guys doing these or attending these. I really would like to get more of your scenarios in here. I've appreciated a bunch of the follow-up questions that we have. We're going to try to do something new in June or July with AOPA doing a crash review and start adding more, some more fun content in. I don't want to say fun, but more content in